Hi, my name is Dr. Nathan Groot. I am a music instructor at the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts, where I teach string ensemble, applied string lessons, and other music courses. Today we're going to be looking at Danse Macabre. This is part of the junior high string audition excerpt package for the North Region Orchestra, specifically the Cadet Orchestra. You'll find this excerpt in the Strictly Strings Book 2. So first thing I like to talk about is the key. There is no key signature, you'll notice. So that means within the key signature, there are no sharps and no flats, which means probably C major, A minor area. There are lots of accidentals here though. An accidental is when a note has a flat or a sharp or a natural next to it when that's not in the key signature. So as you approach this excerpt, just remember everything is natural unless otherwise marked. So in the first line, we just have three pitches that are being played: E flat, D, and A. The A is being simultaneously played with these though. We'll talk about how to work with double stops in terms of the bow in a moment, but let's talk about it in terms of the left hand for a moment. So our first finger, E flat, is down, and E flat is in half position, where your first finger is brought back a half step, sort of right about there. So it's really close to the nut of the fingerboard. One thing that you might run into as you prepare this excerpt is you might accidentally bump the A string with the side of your finger. So you'll get that sound, that sort of sound on your A string instead of. And the reason that's happening is your finger is interfering with the A string's ability to vibrate, right? So how do we fix this? One of the best ways to fix it is to have a little bit more rotation in your hand frame. So you're, rather than sort of looking at the palm of your hand, you're looking more at the pinky finger side of your hand. This will allow you to get a little bit more rotation in the fingers, because most people's fingers are thinner this way than they are this way, right? So that will help. Having the finger up a little higher and curved will help. Experiment a little bit and see what kind of rotation works for you to not bump that other string with your finger. At the beginning of the second line, before the first ending, we have D, G, G, F natural, this is a low 2, right? To E natural, and then we have an E natural to an E flat. And I'm gonna give you a fingering here that is not written in the book. Check with your teacher about this to make sure that they also agree. But there are really two ways to play this. You can play it like this, which is okay, but you have that slide in there. I think that if you were playing this in context in an orchestra, probably the conductor or teacher would want you to do a finger replacement. So here we have our first finger on E natural. While we're changing the bow, I'm gonna bring that first finger back and then put a second finger right next to it. So, first finger E natural, second finger E natural, same note. Practice doing that. So going first finger E, back a half step, second finger down, second finger E, again, 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 again. So that way you can practice doing it really quickly and have it be in tune. If you're practicing this and it's just totally not in tune and it's looking like that might be a little too difficult for you, go back to just a 1-1 slide where you just sort of bring the first finger back under a slur. But I think this one is probably the fingering that you would see most often in context in an orchestra. After we play that, in the first ending, we have E naturals and F sharps now. So that means we're now in this 2-3 finger pattern. So we bring our E flat up to an E natural, and then we have an F sharp and a G. So make sure you're paying attention to those accidentals. Once we get to the second ending, we have third finger, G, first finger, a low 1, a B flat, right? And then a high 2, an F sharp. So these are pitches that maybe you haven't seen together in the same measure or even maybe the same piece. So be careful as you play each of these pitches, and I would recommend just going note by note and making sure that you're getting these notes, because this creates a little bit of a stretch in the hand, sort of reaching back. Just test all of those notes, even with a tuner if you need to make sure you have the right pitch. And then at the end, the pitches at least are the same as the beginning. All right, next thing we should talk about is the bow. So there's a lot to talk about here with the bow because we have all sorts of articulations, all sorts of markings that we need to observe. Let's start at the beginning. We're fortissimo, which means we need to use more weight, a little bit more speed, and closer to the bridge for a more focused, louder sound. We should also be in the lower half. Why? Because number one, it tells us to. It says LH, that's the lower half. But the reason it says LH is because our hand is heavier and we have these lifts which are much easier to do closer to the frog. So my first piece of advice is don't use too much speed. Save your bow. So create this loud sound mostly with weight and contact point. Make sure that you're really only using, I would say, this much bow. I wouldn't really go past, maybe just a little bit past the balance point. The reason is you have half notes that are down bows and then staccato quarter notes that are up bows. So there's a little bit of a math problem here. We're going down for 2 beats and up for 1 beat. So make sure that you're really saving on the down bow and then use a little bit more speed on that up bow so you can get back. But remember, it's staccato, so we need to be shorter. We need to have space and silence afterwards. So just save on that down bow as much as you can. Make sure that you're staying on the string and just stopping your bow. So each time you see these staccatos, make sure you're not coming off the string, but just doing that. I want you to try something. I want you to play the first line, open strings only. Try it with me. 1, 2, 3. Practice like that. Practice like that with your metronome as you build up. Maybe try it, for example, at 100 beats per minute, open strings only, and then the same tempo with the left hand added back in. Just to sort of make sure your bow is doing what you want while you're not really worrying about what the left hand is doing. So then on the second line, we end on a down bow, we have a lift, and we need to set our bow down. We are at a new dynamic, mezzo piano. So we come down from fortissimo, very, very, very loud, and down to mezzo piano. So we need to have that drop in dynamic. We're here, we need to move our contact point closer to the fingerboard, and we need to use less weight. We need to be a little more in the middle of the bow, but I wouldn't actually recommend using less speed here. So we can use speed and not necessarily be loud. So use speed here to create more resonance from your instrument while not pulling a lot of sound by holding the weight away from the string just a little bit more, less weight. So here, by using more speed and less weight in a contact point that's closer to the fingerboard. You can see that I'm using my entire bow, but I'm not pulling a super big sound. I'm getting a little bit of a less focused and softer sound, which is what we want to contrast with the sort of heavy section at the beginning and end. Then in the first ending, we have, when we have that crescendo to mezzo forte, just add a little bit more weight and bring the contact point a little bit closer to the middle here. You'll notice that the mezzo piano is actually before the repeat sign, so I like to keep this second repetition when you go back to the second measure of the second line at mezzo forte. It's marked that way, but also it means that I'm repeating something exactly and I'm changing something, which musically we should always be looking, if there's an exact repeat of something, to make some small difference if we can. In the fifth measure of the second line, the E flat goes to the second ending. This should be a big crescendo, right? So we're going all the way up to forte, and it's leading us back this exciting section here. So the fourth measure of the third line, when we get here, we hit this downbeat on a down bow, and we want to lift, bow circle, bring our bow back on the string, and then move. So let's try that, just open strings, where it says lower half, and that first lift sign is on the third line. 1, 2, 3. The tremolo in just a moment. So make sure that you are lifting and it's a very small bow circle and that you're on the string as much as you can. Then we have these staccatos. Just keep the bow on the string and have that space in between each of those. Now finally, let's talk about this tremolo. So to play a tremolo, you're going to want to be out at the tip. And you're going to want to be using mostly your fingers and hand. The more relaxed you can be, the better. Tremolos get messed up when you become tense and try to use big muscles to do your tremolo. It sort of ceases to become a tremolo once you start doing that. So you need to relax. Try to get a little wiggle in there. If you don't yet have the flexibility in your hand, which honestly is probably likely, this is sort of something you'll explore, a few years really into your journey with the viola. Just try to move as small of muscles as you can. So if that means instead of fingers, if that means forearm instead of upper arm, that in itself is a victory. Just focus on getting the smaller muscles as best you can. So we have this decrescendo here in this last measure. We're coming from forte, we're coming from the lower half. I like to start this and have a nice big down bow and then tremolo at the tip. So practice that with me a few times. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So practice that on your own and see if you can kind of get that same sound where it's pull out and then tremolo at the tip. That way it makes it so much easier to get that decrescendo. Also, you don't need for this to be exactly 3 beats because there is a fermata over it. So you can take just a little bit more time to achieve that decrescendo where you go from forte down to a much softer dynamic. Okay, one thing I want to talk about really quickly is how to play this with the repeats. So when you get to the end of the second line, you're going to repeat back to the second measure of the second line, right? Then you're going to go to the end of the fifth measure of the second line and go directly down to the second ending there on the third line. So make sure that you have this all worked out. If you need to make a photocopy and use colors or something, that's a great way to sort of study it. Maybe go back to the original copy without the colors just to see if you can read it without any aids. But make sure that you're really clear on how the first and second endings work. All right, for the next part of the video, I'm just gonna play it at different tempos, starting at 100 on our metronome. As you play slowly, make sure that you're using the same amount of bow that you will use at 140, which is our goal tempo. So maybe try playing it at 100 and then playing it at 140 and then playing it at 110 and then playing it at 140 again. This can be a good way to make sure that you're not using more bow than you can actually get away with at tempo. One quick disclaimer, playing it at different tempos beginning to end without stopping is not the best way to practice. This is a tool that you can use, but it shouldn't be your only tool. So let's say you practice it at 100 and one of the measures falls apart, but you're able to jump back on. That means you shouldn't go to the next tempo. You should go problem solve and try to figure out what went wrong in that measure, make sure that that measure is isolated and fixed and is back in context at that tempo so that you can play through it perfectly before you move on to a new tempo. This is 100. 1, 2, 3. This is 110. 1, 2, 3. This is 120. 1, 2, 3. This is 130. 1, 2, 3. And here's our goal tempo, 140. 1, 2, 3. All right, so thank you so much for watching. I hope this was somewhat helpful for you. If you have any questions about anything, if I maybe glossed over something, or you have any comments, feel free to leave them below this video in the comments, or feel free to reach out to me on my website or through any of my social media. I'd be happy to hear from you. I wish you the very best of luck in your upcoming audition, and as always, happy practicing.